Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Project Flux and the Weekly Pulse. This week we're joined by Martin Paver because Yoshi is on another holiday. Yes, you
Another
heard
one?
that right. He's having just got back from one, he's off on another one. So thanks to Martin, he's agreed to step in and fill Yoshi's shoes for the next half hour or so. So thank you. But wanted to keep the show on the road, as they say, and sort of discuss some of the big stories because even though it's the summer, I thought sort of things would die down a bit, but it doesn't. There seems to be no sign of it, Martin. You know, if anyone who's read the newsletter that we published on Monday will see there's still a heck of a lot going on in the world of AI and project delivery. And there's a few stories I wanted to touch on, Martin. But the first one was about OpenAI's announcement. Now we know this has been coming for a while. We know that OpenAI were looking at a search feature, as they say, and they were falling further and further behind in what Perplexity were doing. Have you ever used Perplexity, Martin?
I was, yeah.
So that you know, I use it a lot. So they've really stung on a march on that whole kind of AI plus search tool. So I think OpenAI have had to introduce what they call Search GPT, which they're calling an AI-powered search engine, and they're calling it a prototype, which always leaves me a bit worried. Why are they rushing a prototype out into the market? And they say that it integrates traditional search with the chat interfacing, providing source citations and enriched with images and videos. So question to you, Martin, how do you think Search GPT is going to enhance the user search experience compared to like traditional good old-fashioned search engines like Google and Bing?
So it's just a lot more intuitive, right? So instead of you frame those search questions, right, and then say, this is what I need to know so I can answer my question. So instead, we can just put the question in, right? We've not been able to do that before. It's very, very difficult to do it and to get the prompt good enough that you can get the answers back. So it'll now sort of learn about you as well. Over time, it'll start to learn about you and know that you like these sort of restaurants, you prefer these sort of pubs, you prefer these sorts of experiences. So when it gives you the return, it'll start to learn all of that. So I think it's a massive opportunity. But for OpenAI, I wonder why they're doing it, right? So it feels like at the moment they're almost spread betting, but because this is moving so quick, put some stuff out there and see what sticks and what doesn't stick. So just put it out there as an MVP and see if you keep sort of investing in it or not.
Yeah, I think they've been forced to do this because, you know, Google's got their one and then Perplexity is just getting such a name for itself. They probably thought if we leave this much longer, a bit like they did with everyone says Chat GPT rather than large language models, and like Google, you know, you Google something. We're getting to the point, I think, where people are starting to say Perplexity. So I think they were forced to put something out. But I mean, I tried to join it. You have to join a waiting list, so I haven't had a chance to play with it. Have you had a chance to?
No, I haven't, not yet.
No.
I've just seen some of the capabilities of it. It looks really cool.
Yeah.
It looks really cool. But I wonder what it means for OpenAI, right? So I was reading about all this investment that's going to come from like Meta, for instance. So they've got their new Llama out.
Yeah, we'll talk about that shortly.
So it's all of the investment that's coming in, and in terms of organisations like OpenAI, have they got deep enough pockets to be able to stay in the race when you're up against Elon Musk and Metas and things like that? I think it's just, you got really deep pockets to come and play.
Yeah, we're talking we're talking billions, aren't we? This is you know, we've only got the big four to play, and I guess they're leveraging their Microsoft connections for the funding, I would assume.
So some of it, in terms of Microsoft, this is their core business, but it's not the core business for people like Meta, for instance, right? So it's more of a complement for Meta. So what's the overall gain? So there's this really good newsletter I read from this chap called Azim Azar.
Oh yeah, I know that.
It's called Exponential View, and I really enjoy it, right? It's my Sunday morning read, the first thing I read when I get up.
Alongside Project Flux, of course.
In terms of your sort of newsletter, James, what I really like about yours, you're taking all of this information that's out there and then sort of distilling it down to what's applicable for project delivery. And I think that's brilliant. So what I like about Azim's stuff, he's talking about the broadest possible context, and he tells you what's happening in all these different sectors, whatever. And for me, what that does for me personally is it starts to stimulate my thinking about the art of the possible And it's looking about these adjacent spaces, right? So this white space that's around us that we've not quite moved into yet as a profession. So that's what I quite like about it. It's not quite so applied. It's a lot more broad, right? And that's what I like about it.
Yeah, no, it's good. So in terms of Search GPT, how do you, and these, not just Search GPT, but Perplexity and these other Search plus GPT interfaces, how do you think they could help the project delivery profession? Do you think that could overcome some of the challenges we got with the large language models, with hallucinations, lack of citations, things like that?
So I don't know yet, James. In terms of our data, there's a lot of the data that sits at the back of firewalls, right? So if it's not in the public domain, you can't search it. So is there going to be a version of this that sort of scrapes your data and looks across your data from across your enterprise? Which probably means you've got a knowledge graph. If you've got a knowledge graph of all of your data, then can it start to query that?
Doesn't Copilot kind of do that? If you put Copilot on, it can then search your entire Azure instance, which includes any files. So I think that goes some way towards that.
So it's starting to do some of that. So the Microsoft Graph, right, it will query the Microsoft Graph through a Copilot type front end. Mm-hmm. So what we're talking about here is if you've got enough data for your models and looking at instances for the sector versus the organization. So is this an organizational problem or is this a sector problem? And some of it, I think, is about, if you've only got a project of one and you're trying to understand, well, what does this mean for project delivery? Mm. So it's a project, one of your database, it's probably not big enough to be able to give you the reach back to get something that is statistically representative. So I think that's where we need this sort of concept. It needs to be these sort of capabilities, but they're reaching right across loads of different organizations. Now that's going to be really hard to achieve because of all this commercial confidentiality. And that brings you to these data aggregators then. Mm. And that's what Microsoft can do because it can sort of look across all these organizations and sort of smash that data together. But that's more about training its models. It's not necessarily about giving you the references back to the source data. Yeah. So I think that's where the challenge is going to be with it.
Yeah, and we are giving Microsoft all this data and OpenAI, Google, at the end of the day, we're not 100% sure what their plans are going forwards. But it's interesting what you said about OpenAI, because they've got a number of these unreleased features now or things in beta, and it does feel like they're just spreading, they're chucking mud and hoping that they get the right thing. But do you think that strategy of like these delayed releases and beta releases is going to start impacting their reputation, to their competitive edge, especially when you look at what Meta are doing with their Llama?
Personally, James, I struggle with it. Right, it's just the amount of money that's going into it is mind blowing.
It is. It's crazy.
And the problem is as well, it's going so fast that it's about to get faster.
Yeah.
So in terms of Elon Musk's sort of investment in this Memphis cluster.
Yeah, the cluster. I saw that.
On top of that, you've got sort of Meta buying up loads and loads of these chips, these GPUs, and just using them to train up massive models at pace. Mm. So it's just an investment war, right? So if you don't go fast enough now, you can't stay in the race.
Yeah, it's the arms race, isn't it? And there's only 4 people.
The deepest pockets who's going to win it, right?
Yeah.
So there'll be some niches that spin out of it. So from our perspective, what we've got to do as a profession is not try and compete with those things, not try and come up with our own large language models or
No, it's not possible, is it?
It's just building on the top of it all the time. We're building on the top of it. And that's why, some of these vendors that I see in our space, and I see them fine-tuning these models and sort of selling them as proprietary models, I think some of them might just get knocked out overnight because, OpenAI or Elon Musk going to come out with a new feature that does something in that space.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when I was at Digital Construction Week earlier, there was so many new startups there, and a lot of them they were doing exactly what you say. They were just fine-tuning an existing model and putting their own front end on it. But, things like custom GPTs, that's going to get better and better. So people won't need to do that. They'll have the confidence to create their own rather than having to go into this. But it does bring me to another story, actually, which ties into what you said, because there are some jitters and there are some people starting to question just how much money is going into this space. And there were a few stories. I mean, last week, the stock market experienced quite a big drop due to some doubts around the profitability of AI companies. like Alphabet seeing incredibly high expenditures, and then OpenAI, like we talked about, and there doesn't seem to be any immediate return. It's almost as if people are chucking the money because they just don't want to be left behind. So, what do you think are the main factors with this skepticism that's creeping in? Is it the fact that there's no clear roadmap? Like, when are these companies going to start turning this into ROI?
So it's multi-factor, I think, James. So one of the factors is about, so what's the return on investment? So with Microsoft, if it's a standalone organization, just with Microsoft throwing loads of money at this, then they can turn it all into products. They can sell you your sort of Copilots. They can have Copilot Plus and Copilot Plus 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 and just keep putting more and more features on it, right? So they can just get more and more revenue out of it. If it sits in isolation, that's great, but it don't work like that. The world doesn't work like that. So in parallel with that, you've got sort of Meta who's giving it away.
Yeah.
So what does that mean for all the models and the investment case? So as soon as you get off the treadmill, you're out of the game, right? So you've got to stay in the treadmill. You've got to keep on going with it. And I think that's a big, big challenge for these investors, is that technically they can see that there is so much potential from all of this, but what is the revenue model that is going to just outperform everybody else's? That's difficult to sort of work out because nothing's stationary. Everything's moving and it's getting exponential, right? The rate of change is getting faster and faster because of these people invested in these big clusters.
Well, I guess it's a bit like the birth of the internet and the old .com bubble. It took, I don't know how many years, but it took a long, long time for Google to sort of turn around a profit, didn't it? And a lot of the time it wasn't clear exactly how they were going to do that. Obviously, it's very clear now with their advertising and their various kind of portfolio products. And I think maybe it's a case of that. It's, these companies, they know that if they don't win this race and they don't become the Google of the search engine in terms of AI, it's going to be very, very difficult for them to catch up. A good example of that is Bing has never got anywhere close to Google, despite all the investment and despite it's got the Microsoft brand. But what I do find interesting, this goes to, another story in the newsletter, is around Meta's approach, which is different from Google's and from OpenAI's, which is that they're making theirs open source, which, I think speaks really well to what you do, Martin. You're all about open source in terms of the solutions that you create at projecting success as part of the hack. So presumably you see that as a benefit, as a good thing to do, making these models open source. But what are the potential risks with that kind of approach too?
So I think you've got to look at the commercial models, right? So there's some papers out there, so some articles that came out this weekend on it, really good ones actually. So it said what sort of Meta's approach is about to commoditize the complement, right? So that's the term, which is basically is that if you want to sell Microsoft services or Windows and things like that, if you can get the price of computers down so they're very, very cheap, then more people buy computers, so you sell more Microsoft licenses, right? And that's what they basically did. So they gave away DOS, for instance, which is commoditizing the complement.
Yeah.
So what Meta's trying to do is to give this stuff away, not because they're philanthropic, they're sort of trying to improve the world. I don't think that's why they're doing it at all. I think it's to try and knock out some of this competition and try and own their space and commoditize the complement that might be worth a lot to somebody else. And if they can knock them out, then they can then start to build off the back of it.
That's so interesting. Yeah, because they make it sound like it's all around for the good of the industry. But of course, Meta, they're in it for themselves. And let's be fair, they haven't had the best reputation. They were the ones who were heavily implicated in the whole sort of data sharing issue. And what was it? Was it Cambridge Analytica scandal back in the last? Yeah. So some people are saying, is this a redemption mark for Mark Zuckerberg? Is he turning around his reputation? But I tend to agree that there's more to this than meets the eye. This is not him just being nice. This is him trying to corner the market.
Yeah. So it's a strategy. So in terms of investment, he can't compete with Elon Musk, right? He's the richest man in the world. He's just going to keep throwing money at this forever. So it's like a game of poker, right? You just go all in.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be? I mean, the best thing for all of them. I mean, I'm sure this is just cloud cuckoo land, but wouldn't it be better if the four of them? I'm talking Microsoft, Google, Apple. Oh, look, we forgot about Apple, but there's actually 6 because you've got Apple and you've got Elon Musk as well. Why don't they just all get together and create a model that they can all leverage? Because they're just up against each other. They're all effectively doing the same thing. I know it's cloud cuckoo land, but that would be, talking about the man who set up the data trust.
It's just such a waste of money, is that they're all doing very, very similar things in parallel. Right? They're far back off looking at where the differentiators are, these outlier cases, and exploit those outliers, and then really go for it, right? And invest in these use cases where you jump to the next generation. Mm-hmm. But world's not like that, is it? And then
no.
It's not just about those as well. You've got all the Chinese who's investing in it as well, and they've got their own models. And as well, so with the Chinese companies, because they can't get their hands on some of these chips because the Americans have locked them all down, etc., they're going to start to develop their own, and that'll be next generation probably, because they'll make a jump sooner or later. They've got to.
Yeah. I mean, it was
fascinating where the industry's going to go, but it is speeding up, James. That's what people don't realise, I think. So there's all these language models coming out, but it's just going to get faster.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because, a lot of people say to me now is, this is a fad and we're going to go through the old Gartner trough of disillusionment and, this time next year there'll be another buzzword. But I don't agree with that. I think this is going to speed up. I think, there's going to be, when GPT-5 comes out, whatever the next benchmark is, where we get to that PhD level reasoning, that's going to be another change. And I think this is here to stay. I think we're just going to have better and better models coming out. And when you combine that with the other technologies like VR, like robotics, and have you seen that robot, the Elon Musk robot that integrates OpenAI? I mean, this is where we're going, right? We're gonna have a vastly different workspace in probably 5 years' time.
And it's massive, James. So back in my day, we did a course. I did my APM course, or I did my Prince 2 course, whatever. Then 5 years later, you had to do another course because they force you to go and top it up, right?
Yeah, CPD, whatever it is.
So basically, they give you a certificate that expires in 5 years' time. That's changing. That entire sort of dynamic is changing. Mm-hmm. You can't wait 5 years to go and update your knowledge in this space. You've got to do it week by week. You've got to be reading your newsletters. You've got to be listening to the videos, coming along to meetups, going on to hackathons, and trying this stuff out for life. Absolutely. So once you jump on this treadmill, you can't get off it because you've got to keep up with it.
Unless I was thinking about that. I was thinking about that today, actually, Martin, because what I found is that the more I get into this, and the more research I do in it, the more behind I feel. It's because you realise how much you don't know the more you do, and that's not to scare people off in any way, shape, or form. It's just to say this subject is so huge and it's growing all the time, and there's literally thousands, and we're going to touch on one in a minute. There's literally thousands of blog articles, reports, newsletters coming out every single week on this subject. So you have to get on the treadmill, I think, because the longer you stay off of it, the harder it's going to be. It's going to speed up, and you're just not going to be able to get on it, right?
So I think what we're all trying to do is drink from a fire hose, right? We can't. It's coming too thick and too fast. So if a load of us can get together, we take a straw each, then we probably can digest it. And that's what we're trying to do through the coalition as well, is saying, right, let's divvy it up. So somebody's going to be expert on this bit of the LLMs or knowledge graphs or Power Automate, etc. If we can link that back to the product for the profession in terms of where do you want to be on QS or risk management, whatever, that's when we can drink all of this water that's coming out of the fire hose.
Yeah, break it up into manageable parts.
We just can't do it with one person, but that one person needs to sit at the top and say, I understand what's going on, I know who to speak to, I know where to look, etc.
Yeah.
The problem is the project profession at the moment, there's too many people who just don't see it coming and don't see a need to just upskill in this area.
I agree.
And they're just going to fall behind.
But that's why it's so important what you do. And for those listening to this on a Wednesday, on Friday, we got a full discussion with you, Martin, on your career, and we touch on the coalition in quite a lot of detail. So do tune into that, because there's a lot more around the coalition. But you're absolutely right. It's something that we can only do between us, really. And if you've got an organisation, whether it's an SME or a large organisation, you've got to split the load up. You can't expect one person to do this all themselves and then make decisions, because decisions are going to have to be made almost weekly with the way that the tech is evolving. But it did bring me on to the last story I wanted to cover, Martin, actually. And this is a bit of a frustration for me. There was yet another survey done. This time it's by the IFS. I'm not sure who they are, but there's another survey around the UK construction industry and AI in the UK construction industry. And my frustration is, I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at it, but it's just nothing new. It's another survey, and it repeats the same points that have been made on every other survey that's come out over the last 18 months. And all of them basically just talk about productivity, safety, efficiency improvements, but they don't really address the issue that they're only looking for the next year or 2 years. None of them are really looking at where this is going. So how frustrating is it that these surveys just keep saying the same thing and don't seem to be addressing the elephant in the room, which is in 5-10 years time there's going to be a fundamental shift?
So it's not 5 to 10 years, James. I think that's the problem. It just needs leadership, right? So if Elon Musk came along into construction, say at the moment, and said, right, this is what I'm going to do, he could do it now. It's not 5 to 10 years, right? It's all possible today.
And that's possible, isn't it? He could do that tomorrow if he wanted to. It's not past him.
And it's just that leadership. I think the difference is for the sort of public companies, those who's got shareholders and things, it's very difficult to make this investment and say, this is what we're going to do. Because in terms of construction, you just need to be a little bit better than your competitors and just stay in the race. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
It's for some of these privately owned businesses, these family owned businesses, where they're looking at, right, we can take a few more strategic punts. I think that's where it's got to come from. It's the likes of, you say, Robert McAlpine's, for instance, and even Glean's as well. They say, right, this is where we need to be pitching it as a business, and let's make some big investments in it, and let's start to drive it in that direction.
And I think you've got to be afraid. You can't be afraid to experiment and have a go. I think the problem sometimes with big organisations, and I don't count Leeds in this because they have allowed us to experiment, is that they want everything. They want a strategy for everything. They want everything bottomed down with very little risk. Whereas because this stuff is so new and it's changing, you've got to be able to experiment and just have a go and fail fast. That's why what you do with the hacks and the apprenticeships is so important.
So it's not just about failing fast. Through this journey as well, you're learning all the time, right? So you're learning who your advocates are. You're learning who's got resilience, right? So when they come across problem after problem after problem, do they just give up and then finish up leaving because they're fed up, or do they keep going? So they find out about your data problems internally and that your IT doesn't work in this instance and it doesn't work in that instance. These are all things you need to fix as you go. So it's not just about taking a punt on a piece of technology. It's using all of that to work out your next step. And I think that's where we're trying to go at the moment. It's just, you can't plan out your next 50 steps through a linear sort of fashion, because once you're 4 steps through, there'll be ChatGPT 5 out that'll do it all for you, and you're going to work out a different way of doing it. So what people then do, they stand in the shadows and say, well, I'll wait for the next generation, and then I'll do it.
Yeah, you can't do that. You never do it then.
They never do anything because it's all going to change next month. And it's like buying a computer, right? You may as well wait for the next one, or the next iPhone. I'm going to wait for the next one because it's going to have the new features on it. And you finish up never getting one.
Yeah. So what would your advice be then for someone, say a small SME listening to this, who are saying, right, I want to get involved. What's the first step? What's the first thing I should do? Number one.
So it depends about their business, right? Is this going to be core to their business? Is it core to their business model? Or is this just a little bolt-on? So if you're in the project delivery space, I would say personally, it's sort of integral part to what we're trying to achieve. So you've got to learn about it. So if you want to learn about it, you either throw yourself in the deep end and come along to all these meetups and hacks and things like that and just immerse yourself with your newsletter and stuff, or just surround yourself by people who understand it.
LinkedIn's a great place for that, is it? If you follow the right people on LinkedIn, you get some really good case study stories.
So it's those debates I really like as well. Something that I try and do is try and polarize people, because if you polarize people, you get a discussion going, and then it brings out the different opinions, and that's really good. That's what I like.
Yeah, so everyone should listening to this should definitely follow Martin. He has some feisty discussions on LinkedIn, which I always enjoy. It's we're kind of getting towards the end of the weekly polls, but you did raise something that I wanted to plug a little bit, and that was around the meetup. So the next meetup is on Wednesday, the 14th of August, and it just so happens that you'll be presenting at that one, Martin. So if anyone wants to hear a bit more from Martin and meet him in person and get some free pizza and beer, then come along. What are you going to be talking about, Martin, on the 14th?
So it's about next generation risk management, James. So I wrote a book on it. So I've asked my guys to print a few of the books out. If you come along, you might get a free book. So it's to talk about what does risk management look like in the future. And I'm not going to be lecturing to people for an hour. So I'll just give a 10-minute talk or something. And what I'd like is a conversation about it, right? If people disagree with me, great. I love it. So let's have a bit of a conversation and let's get some polarized views on it and see what people think. And that gets the debate going, you know?
Yeah, and for anyone who hasn't come to the meetups, it's very informal, and it is exactly that. We have a good chat, and you get to meet people. So do come along if you haven't been before. It's at the Gleeds offices. It starts at 6:30, and as I said, if any other incentive you need other than to hear Martin speak, there's free pizza and beer. So hopefully you see people there. But Martin, listen, thank you. Great to sort of chew the cud with you, talk about all the stories. Thank you for standing in for Yoshi. Really
It's my
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
It's my pleasure.
And I know who to call if it goes on yet another holiday. No, pleasure. And for anyone listening now, we also have a much more sort of formal interview with Martin, which will be released this Friday if you're listening on the Wednesday that this podcast is being broadcast. On Friday, I don't know what date that is. I think it's about the 3rd of August. We'll be releasing a formal interview with Martin Paver, so do tune into that as well. But until next week, bye-bye, everyone.